Yeah, so good morning, other side of the planet, and probably this side of the planet as well, everyone. My name's Casey Ellis, and clearly the coffee is kicking in, but we shall get there with that. Stoked to be on AirGap. Thanks, guys, for inviting me onto this one. Just looking at the lineup and all that stuff, looking forward to watching some more of the videos today and going back through the ones. It's just a killer group of people giving talks, and Thug Crowd's always a good time. But yeah, so today we're going to talk about Disclose.io. Vuln disclosure and hacker safe harbor in 2020. Some stuff that we've been doing, just sort of taking you guys through where it's all at, what we're trying to do to make things better, and how, you know, basically everyone can help at this point. So by way of introduction, there's the hustle and there's the hack. My name's Casey. I'm the founder, chairman, and CTO of BugCrowd. Basically started the crowdsourced security as a platform industry about 8 years ago from here in Sydney, and then went across to San Francisco and grew the company there. We're back here at the moment because we kind of bugged out while COVID played out, but do intend on getting back over there sometime soon. My backstory is basically hacker through to pen tester, through to solutions and sales, and then got it in my head I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Started working on stuff, and BugCrowd is the most recent thing that I've been working on, and obviously it's working. I think the model of going out and getting feedback and accessing the creativity of all the people that are sitting around the table wanting to help, that have the skills. It's something that the market and defenders have realized they actually need. It's not a nice to have. It's like, we're kind of fucked if we don't, because there's a lot of bad guys and we don't have enough good guys to go around. So how do we level the playing field? That was really the thesis behind actually starting the company in the first place. But really, it kind of kicked off with this precursor idea of vulnerability disclosure and hackers operating in good faith, identifying things, trying to help, and that kind of connection point between the breaker and the builder being sort of the essence of the elements of kind of like the missing link in cybersecurity, this feedback loop that without adversarial feedback, a builder doesn't really know that they're doing anything wrong because the shit they're building works. So how do we tighten that feedback loop and just turn that into a normal thing? So that's kind of the backstory of how we got here. And yeah, that's why I've got the hustle side of it and the suit, and I have the hack side of it that I try to keep in play as I do the corporate overlord thing. So yeah, let's talk about kind of what we're trying to solve here, right? CFAA is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in the United States. It's kind of basically almost universally, or at least globally, cited as the granddaddy of anti-hacking laws, at least in modern thought. And the backstory behind CFAA is it actually is a product of Ronald Reagan seeing the movie War Games one time at Camp David, and basically freaking out, like saying, "Oh, wait, I didn't know that was possible. We should make this illegal." Going and tapping the DOJ on the shoulder and writing some laws out of which the CFAA was essentially formed. And I think there's aspects of that were actually important to do for that point in time. And I think there's reasons that still exist to make sure that actual malicious computer crime with intent is still something that can be legally pursued and has legal opportunity for recourse to. But really the point is that most of the legal frameworks that exist, definitely the CFAA, and then all of the thinking and legal structures that kind of grandfathered out of CFAA, were formed without this concept of good faith. It was basically, if you're doing something bad to a computer, you're automatically a bad person. That's automatically criminal, and you're automatically going to jail if we catch you doing that. So I think really what we've seen over the past 8 years, bug bounty and vuln disclosure was a very hard conversation to have. It was starting to get a little bit interesting, a little bit topical when BugCrowd rocked up. And since then, I think it's gone from being this very novel idea to being relatively normal in security and in IT. And I think as well, the concept of a hacker being someone who's able to operate in good faith and actually do these kind of bad looking things, but for a purpose that actually advances humankind, that's better understood. But still, all of the work that we do exists under this kind of overarching legal framework where it's bad until it's proven that it's good. And really Disclose.io is about trying to unfuck that particular problem. So here's our kind of history. 95, backstory, the Netscape bugs bounty program, they dropped the S eventually because it's cleaner. But that's the first computer technology bug bounty program that we've been able to find. There's stuff back in the I think it's the 17th or 18th century where there was bounties around lock sport, which is kind of cool. But Netscape's the granddaddy of the computer version of that. 2008, Facebook started making a bunch of noise about it. 2012, BugCrowd kicked off really as a product of conversations I was having with pen test customers where they were looking at what Facebook and Google were doing and saying, hey, that looks cool. It's not just that it looks cool, it seems to make sense. If we're trying to outsmart an army of adversaries, then having an army of allies just seems to be a logical way to balance the equation. It's not just about the Bay Area kind of Kool-Aid of the idea. And it's not actually even just about the fact that it's morally the right thing to do. It just kind of makes sense from an economics and resourcing standpoint. So we kicked off BugCrowd and started doing a bunch of programs and really kind of learning as a company what it looked like to actually intermediate all of these different conversations. And we realized a couple of things. The first is that trying to get a legal team to write a contract that the company then puts on its website with the internet that says it's okay for you to hack us is hard. It's usually the first time they've done that. And one of the things that lawyers do tend to do when they feel like they're in uncharted territory is they'll basically write War and Peace every time. It's like, okay, how do we create as much legal language to cover off all of the potential things that could go wrong as we possibly can, because we feel like that's the legally responsible thing to do. Or if it's a outsourced firm, sometimes it's because they're being charged by the 7-minute block, but that's a whole other thing. It ends up being like a very, very large and fairly complicated document that comes out because we are in the business of unintended consequence, right? Like none of these bugs were meant to be there in the first place, and the people that eventually find them weren't necessarily expected to do that when the stuff got built. So lawyers struggle with that. But then it's not just that. It's the idea that like hackers don't seem to actually be reading the briefs, which is like a known problem, still a known problem. It's been a challenge for a long time. I think them being like long and complicated is part of it, but also a lot of the folk that end up working on disclosure and bounty programs, their English is a second language, or they don't have a legal mindset or a legal background. So the expectation for them to go through and read the EULA is really not one that's going to be like, it provides some degree of legal like checkbox coverage, but it doesn't actually educate. It doesn't actually give them an idea of what they're getting into and what they can expect. So there's that problem. But then, oh, hang on, like if someone screws up, things like the CFAA, things like, DMCA in the case of anti-circumvention and software that you actually hold in your hands. Those sorts of legal constructs on a federal level in the US and their counterparts internationally actually make screwing this up a potential felony crime, which is bad. That's not a good thing. If we're asking people to help and then saying, oh, by the way, like, just make sure you get it absolutely right. Otherwise you might be in a position where you're legally exposed. Like that can be improved on. And yeah, going back to, CFAA, this is what the kind of the use of that law looks like, as a part of what we've done with BugCrowd, and then as a part of what we've done doubling down into Disclose.io, we spend a lot of time talking with the Department of Justice on this stuff. And there's a lot of people within the DOJ that actually do understand this problem, and they want to see it resolved to create the right kind of carve-outs for good faith. But as you can imagine, they're a little bit busy with other things at the moment as well. So it is being used. You see, a lot of these 1030s are actually against what you would consider to be like legitimate computer crime with actual malicious intent that would be broadly agreed on, as opposed to, okay, this is vulnerability research that was conducted totally, in a way that was clean and comfortable. And even the kind of vulnerability research that gets a bit murky in terms of how it plays out, that stuff doesn't actually get prosecuted at a criminal level against 1030 all that often. But 1030 still does provide this pretty heavy chilling effect on people that are doing that type of work. So really, the question we started asking ourselves, myself and Chris Rathke, my co-founder, is like, how do we make this easy to do well? Like, we've got all of these complex concepts that we're trying to distill down to this point of connection, and everyone seems to be having a hard time. How do we simplify it? So in 2014, we launched a open source vulnerability disclosure framework in collaboration between Bugcrowd and a firm out of DC called Cypher Law. They do like intellectual property law and basically keeping hackers out of jail on VR related stuff. At the same time, ISO 24197 and 30111 got released for paying customers. So that's the stuff that like Art Mannion, Katie Mazuris, all of those folk were working on at that point in time. So there was, we started to triangulate around this whole, like, how do you do this properly question, which was cool. Between 2014 and 2017, the OSVDF language, the language that was in that repo, got translated into, I think, 4 languages that we've been able to identify. It got kind of copy pasted all over the internet. We've picked up snippets of it in at least 500 or so programs. And that's kind of how these briefs grow. It's like, oh, the Facebook program like brief looks good. Let's just take a bit of that or just copy it wholesale or whatever. It's one of those kind of phenomena. It's a phenomena in legal boilerplate language just as it is, but especially when it's actually intended to sit out there on the internet. So we noticed that as a trend. And then in 2018, Amit hit the talk circuit on Safe Harbor with her hashtag legal bug bounty. Which was great because what that did was really drove, I think, a lot of awareness around the fact that the safe harbor issue for hackers is actually a big one. It's not just about how do you facilitate it, it's about how do you make it safe. I think prior to that, most of the safety conversation had been on the program owners, not actually about the hackers themselves in the public eye. Like, we'd obviously been focusing on that a lot and trying to improve it, but Amit was awesome in what she did around creating broader public awareness of the fact that, that's actually a big part of the equation that needs to be solved. And so 2018, we spun Disclose.io out of OSVDF and legal bug bounty. So basically joined forces and with them and the folks, Dropbox did their safe harbor clause, and it all kind of went from there. And in 2019, Bugcrowd added Disclose.io terms basically as default. So when we start a new disclosure program on the platform or a new public bug bounty program, Disclose.io and the safe harbor terms go on there by default. It's actually at the behest of the organization to turn it off, not to turn it on. And really, we started doubling down on Disclose.io as its own initiative and its own kind of open source quasi-independent thing that is really pursuing this broader subject of just making disclosure safer, but also making it ubiquitous. Few of you would know about this whole case because this is, what I was saying before about 1030 has usually been used for criminal. When they actually end up in the dock, what does happen downstream of that is this kind of thing. So Kevin Finnis there, who's a phenomenal researcher and a great guy, was doing work on DJI. Essentially, DJI just didn't kind of like what he did or how the conversation went down. And if you check that letter out at some point in time, the language in it is incredibly strong. Basically, it was to the effect of if you're not completely following every directive that we give you around what you can and cannot do with the things that you found out with the drone that you bought that is sitting in your hands right now, we're gonna lawyer up and do all sorts of fun stuff. And really, this shouldn't be an option. This shouldn't be an avenue of recourse for folks, especially folks that have launched a disclosure program and then decide that they want to renege on components of it. And everyone learned a lot of lessons out of that. I think DJI were in a position where they'd actually kind of come out the gate to launch their program a little bit quickly, and they were learning some things on the fly. But the fact that this was even possible in the first place is part of the problem. So that's what we're here to try to fix. So we did a survey. Actually, it was Amit who did a survey that came back that 60% of good faith hackers don't submit vulnerabilities for fear of legal retribution, for fear of things like DMCA and CFA actually being used against them, and their actions being interpreted as having been conducted in bad faith. which means there's all of this talent, all of this intent, all of this goodwill, all of this creativity that's just laying waste because of the chilling effect of the fact that this hasn't been normalized yet. So yeah, that got us thinking. It's like, all right, we've simplified it. People are starting to read the briefs a little bit better now. There's some sort of, there's some standardization starting to happen in the language, which is good. It's far from perfect even today, but it definitely kicked things off in the right direction, which was good. I kind of got the picky in the brain thing on. It's like, how do we make the adoption of vulnerable disclosure with best practice a viral trend? Like, how do we take this so that it's not just, security researchers or industry advocates or, platforms and companies like Bugcrowd going out there and trying to drive this as a new normal, to borrow an overused phrase that's being thrown around right now. How do we actually have the market kind of direct itself in that direction? And that was really what led to how we've constructed Disclosure. So the vision for this project is a healthy and ubiquitous internet immune system. It needs to be functional and it needs to be everywhere. Our mission is to drive vulnerable disclosure adoption through safety, through simplicity, and through standardization. Because this is a complicated thing to do. I think it's easy to underestimate that on the researcher side of the fence. I think it's easy to underestimate that on the program owner side of the fence. Because you've got your one lens that you're applying to the process, whereas in reality, as I said before, it's all about unintended consequence and how do you corral all of that through as orderly a path as possible. The components of Disclosure, there's a couple of bits and I'll run through these. It's essentially the terms which drive towards standardization of language, get everyone on the same page, get them all singing on from the same hymn book, make this as copy pasta boilerplate as it possibly can be, so it just becomes like a normal part of what you do as an organization who's on the internet, and as a researcher or as someone who's found something. Even if you're not doing research, it's like, oh yeah, I know where I can go, I know I can do that. The list is essentially an open source list of every bug bounty and vulnerable disclosure program we've been able to find. Really the goal of that is to drive engagement from the community and to actually deliver a network effect to people that are doing it well. And then the logo is to promote the cybersecurity posture of early adopters that, they drive best practice. So safe harbor is the key component of that. And really what that's about is like normalization. And I'll get to how that works in a second, but those are kind of the three main pieces. Disclosure is the site for this. There's a GitHub repo. It's all very much driven around open source for those of you who are interested in checking all of this stuff out and actually helping be a part of making it spread. So let's go through the terms. The terms are, essentially a collection of boilerplates. How do you use them? You can copy paste. We see organizations do that, especially smaller ones and ones that are kind of more tech focused. They'll just say, yeah, that's fine, boom, boom, done. Some use it as a foundational framework for their vulnerability disclosure policy. They might have things that they want to tweak and change that are specific to their business, but they can use these as a framework. It's also intended as a starting point for new versions. So at the moment we're in, there's global terms, there's US and Canadian terms, there's actually terms that are specific for the states to adopt around the US 2020 presidential election. And that was an interesting brief to write, but that's up there. And there's a couple of others that we're pushing to, but the whole idea is that, for folks in different regions with different legal frameworks, like the laws that specifically get called into play in Canada are pretty similar, I think, in how they actually play out to the US, but they're fundamentally different as well. So, making those tweaks regionally relevant is part of what we rely on the community to do. It's contributed to and assisted by lawyers, program owners, and policymakers. So really the whole idea is that we want everyone who has a hand in this to have an opinion and to actually have the opportunity to give feedback on these terms. And on the right side here, you can sort of see where that feedback's been coming from. And these aren't company or organization level endorsements of the project, just to be super clear about that, but this is where the kinds of people who've been contributing to it work. So this is the sort of firepower that we're accessing to actually, to drive this program forward. And it's awesome because I think the people that get involved and contribute on the legal side, they can understand the importance of this and the value of it. It is, all things considered, kind of a quirky problem to solve, but its ramifications, I think, on the future of the safety of the internet are pretty big, and people that get that really dive into it. With the design of the terms, this is the part that made it really fun with the election piece, and honestly has made it interesting, I think, for all of them. It's an exercise in some pretty crazy balance. You want the terms to be legally complete. You want them to give safety in both directions, so for the organization, but also for the hacker. But also you want them to be readable and to be brief, accommodating things like English as a second language and lack of legal background. Those three things pull almost completely opposite to each other. So landing it in the middle and being able to say, okay, this is going to be the thing that is adoptable enough to solve the problem and to actually align an organization around how they're going to respond to people like Kevin before. That's the main goal of the terms. So to have enough coverage to be able to say, cool, I understand what's going to happen here, but also to drive alignment. And yeah, it's tricky. But here's the terms. I mentioned those before. Really, check the repo out. If there's stuff that you can do, there's calls to action at the end, so I won't preempt that, but this is where it all sits. And we've just added draft repos for Australia and New Zealand. So the goal this year is to get the Five Eyes done because most of the people that work on this speak English, so we're going to start there. But contribution and all of that is really encouraged and appreciated by everyone who's involved. All right, so the list. The list is like literally, it's a JSON list that sits up on a repo, includes like everything that we know about at this point in time. There's some automation going into that now. We're encouraging people to do more automation. So like scraping security.txt files, for example, is something that we're just starting to see people get into. There's all sorts of other ways to do it, but the idea is to have this list be as comprehensive as possible. And then almost to like trigger a treasure hunt, so that you can see that there's a policy and an intake form for a particular organization. Like, have you looked at that policy and sort of figured out whether or not they have safe harbor carve outs and all that sort of stuff, or do they have a bounty program? Do they have any kind of commitment to offer swag or that sort of thing? And so it's just kind of this repo. The whole thing's licensed under CCA 4.0, so anyone can use it. At the moment, it's actually powering the list on the Bugcrowd website. So disclose.io repo with the JSON there, we pull that in and actually use that to power our list that we've got on our page. And we're starting to see others use it for the same reason. So that's a use case. We've got a lot of bounty hunters, I think, just kind of starring it and waiting for new stuff to pop up and actually using that to power their research as well, which is pretty cool. This is kind of the borrow part. I think it's the logo. So the idea, the goal for this thing is for it to become like the green padlock, or like, for the Aussies, a safety house, like the sticker on the post box. For the Americans, it's, neighborhood watch, essentially. It's a logo that ubiquitously signals a certain thing in a way that directs a particular response and a particular behavior from the audience, regardless of who that audience is. And just to explain partial and full safe harbor, there's been some, we accidentally kicked off an equivalent to the responsible versus coordinated debate around the use of the word safe harbor. It's not safe harbor, you can do everything. Like, no one would ever mean that. I'm not even sure why that's a conversation, but I think it explains as well as it can this idea of like, if you're doing these things, then you are afforded these types of protections in your conduct. It's as simple and as difficult as that. So partial safe harbor is essentially, it's a good faith statement. It's like, if you do this, we agree not to pursue you. The challenge with partial safe harbor is the legal air cover hasn't really been addressed at that point. There's still the potential to be pursued criminally, even if you're not pursued on a civil level. You haven't really changed or authorized really the behavior, which is what full safe harbor is about. It's explicit authorization against anti-hacking laws like CFAA. It's explicit exemption against anti-circumvention laws like the DMCA. It's exemption against acceptable use policy or terms of service, which is kind of like what Aaron's law was trying to achieve at the legal level. And it's a general acknowledgement of good faith. So this is sort of how we've divvied out, like, these are the blocks that need to be there in order for these logos to apply. And, honestly, in order for it to be considered as best practice, I think, by the community. And what we'll do over time is start to add normalization around disclosure policies and windows and different things like that. I don't think that's normalized enough yet for us to push on that one, but that's in the roadmap as well. And sort of this is how it works. Like, you put it all together and you end up with this, with the whole idea of talking about this going viral. It feels a bit too soon to frame it up like that. But honestly, that's kind of what we're trying to get done here. So an org starts a VDP, they get added to the list, they get, or they add themselves to the list. And do they have safe harbor or not? If they don't, they see it because they've been responded to from the list as not having it. They'll go back to the terms, review them, add them to the list. Then you do have safe harbor. That's awesome. They get the logo and put it somewhere. And at that point in time, two things happen. Hackers see it and say, okay, I'm going to try to help you now because this is best practice and I feel safe in doing that. But the other thing that happens is their customers see it and the internet sees it. It's one of these things where it's like, you're actually doing the right thing. I feel more confident and more safe with trusting my data and my business to your organization, at which point their competition sees it. And then this happens. This is really what we're trying to see kind of go down. Like, the whole idea of like driving this as best practice that's desirable for everyone to actually participate in. I think vulnerability disclosure is something that everyone's going to have to figure out how to do. It's going to become normal. It's in the process of becoming normal right now. We're trying to increase the virality of doing it right. And it's working. There's all sorts of adoption going on. Hack the Pentagon is one that everyone knows. Kaspersky adopted Disclose.io as their policy. As I mentioned, we're doing stuff with elections and so on. So what's next? We want full coverage of Five Eyes, 3,000 programs with 30% full safe harbor adoption on the list. And we want to see the logo, in as many places as possible. We're going for 500 this year and driving that one forward. Call to action for folk that are watching this. If you're in an organization that doesn't have a VDP, push on them to start. And like, honestly, Buckcrack can help with this stuff, but it doesn't need to be us. I think there's all sorts of different ways to get this going. And the more important thing is that this becomes normal and the conversation between builders and breakers can happen and just be a normalized thing. That's what I want to see go on. And then, if you start a VDP, get the terms, join Disclose.io, grab the stuff, put it up on the site and actually promote the fact that you're driving safety and simplicity for hackers and for this conversation and the virality that goes with that. There's always the opportunity to contribute to the list and to the terms, and appreciate all the help we can get on that one. That's a good one. And then spread the word. I think every hacker that's involved in this, from a vulnerability discovery and contribution side of things, also has the ability to actually drive adoption and make the internet a safer place as a result. So that is my spiel. And thank you again to the AirGap folk.
Hell yeah.
That was awesome, man.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is very useful stuff that where a lot of people in the chat are saying, like, it's awesome to have this kind of language, it's awesome to have this kind of thing, and that we need more stuff like this. So thank you very much for putting it together first and then presenting on it as well.
Absolutely.
A lot of people just want to chase. Sorry, a lot of people just want to chase the EIP, right? They're like their head's so in the machine, they forget that what they're doing might be a problem.
There's a whole bunch of fuzzy stuff that's got to be the precursor to that conversation going through easily, and that's kind of the bit that we're trying to make a little smoother here. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, definitely. And like big businesses with money can own people, and small business with no money don't really know what to do. There's like a whole complex thing out there, and I guess this is a step forward towards solving it.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because the smaller tech companies do seem to have an easier time adopting this stuff because they could just bake it in from ground zero. Like the bigger, or from day zero rather, bigger companies tend to have to do a whole bunch of cultural realignment and stuff like that. And like that's honestly part of the goal of this as well, is to is to, you know, to be able to promote internally. Like, yeah, look at all these other companies doing BDP. Like, this is totally normal. You can all relax. It's not scary hackers on the outside trying to, it's just a part of how the internet works. If there's like, you know, easy ways. Yeah, I mean, it's true. Like, here's me with usual suspects, and you looking like you just come out of a silo, or you're in a silo by the look of it. But I mean, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, all right, this is best practice. Let's just do it. Let's just make it simple.
Cool.
So yeah, it's a good thing.
Cool. Well, thanks for that, Casey. And I guess you have Level Up. Is it next week?
Yeah. So May 9th, we got Level Up, Halver Flake, Fuzzy Knob, a whole bunch of just fun speakers on that one. So it is the season for virtual conferences. Level Up's been going since 2017, so we're happy to double down on it this year. It's become even more relevant than it was before, I think, at this point.
Excellent. We'll see you there.
No worries. Cheers, guys. Thanks.
See ya.